I stepped into my Chicago condo, and the silence I expected was shattered. My father, Robert, was screaming threats at the top of his lungs. In the corner of the living room, my 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, was curled into a tight ball, trembling. Down the hall, my sister, Stephanie, was violently tearing through my bedroom drawers, hunting for my digital hard drive. She was hunting for my encrypted, secure hard drive, a contingency plan I had prepared specifically for the day their mask finally slipped. My emergency room training kicked in. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford when a patient is bleeding out. I didn't scream. I stepped back into the silent hallway and dialed 911. Before I pull back the curtain on the secrets that led to this night, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. There is a golden hour in trauma surgery. It is the critical window of time where immediate, decisive action means the difference between recovery and total system failure. As I stood in the corridor, listening to the echoes of my father's rage bouncing off the walls of the sanctuary I had built for my child, my emotional monitors flatlined. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why my own blood was ransacking my home. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I pulled out my phone and began the triage. My first move was to secure the perimeter. I opened my smart home application and engaged the security lockdown. I triggered the emergency safety protocol, which automatically locks the doors to contain the intruders while alerting the authorities, as my daughter was in immediate danger. With a single tap, the electronic deadbolt sealed the front door, and the internal security cameras switched from motion sensor to continuous high-definition recording. I activated the ambient audio monitors. Every threat my father shouted, every destructive crash my sister made in my bedroom, was instantly archived into a secure cloud server. The evidence was preserved in real time. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a documented home invasion. Next, I needed to cut off their life support. For years, I had been the central bank for my father and sister. I opened my banking application. My thumb moved with the same steady precision I used when holding a scalpel. I navigated to the joint checking account my father used for his so-called business expenses. I clicked freeze. As the primary account holder who funded the account, I exercised my right to restrict access to prevent further unauthorized depletion of my own capital. I moved to the supplementary credit cards I had issued to my sister for emergencies. She had abused them for years, and tonight the credit limit was reduced to 0. I revoked their authorization. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon some trace of regret or familial guilt, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet, and I was finally balancing the books. They had operated under the assumption that my loyalty was a permanent subscription they never had to pay for. They were about to learn that the subscription had been abruptly canceled. I stood in the hallway, listening to my father realize the front door was electronically locked. I heard the muffled thump of him rattling the handle, completely unaware that the police were already silently ascending in the elevator. I didn't feel an ounce of fear. I felt the cold, hard certainty of a chief physician who had just stabilized a critical patient. My daughter was the patient. My family was the infection. And I was the cure. My finger hovered over my phone screen, finalizing the complete financial blackout. By 12:03 a.m., they were entirely locked out of my digital life, my finances, and my mercy. The golden hour had passed, and my retaliation was officially underway. To understand how my father and sister ended up locked inside my apartment waiting for the police, you have to understand the decade of quiet extortion that preceded it. I was the useful daughter. While I spent 14-hour shifts in the emergency room, pulling people back from the brink of death, my family was busy treating my career as their personal trust fund. I was the silent investor in their version of family. Whenever my father's phantom business ventures faced sudden tax liabilities, I received the frantic phone call. Whenever Stephanie needed another mysterious loan to cover her lifestyle, I was the one wiring the funds. The trap I had fallen into is something psychologists call the normalization of cruelty. It doesn't happen overnight. It is a slow, insidious process where boundary violations are reframed as love. When you grow up in an environment where your worth is entirely conditional on your usefulness, you start to believe that being used is the only way to be loved. They conditioned me to accept their exploitation as a normal family dynamic. If I protested, I was labeled selfish. If I hesitated to write the check, I was accused of forgetting where I came from. Over time, the abnormal becomes your baseline. You start to rationalize the financial drain. You tell yourself, it is just money, or they are family. This is what families do. I had normalized their cruelty to the point where I didn't even recognize I was being bled dry. I thought I was being a supportive daughter and a protective older sister. In reality, I was just a host organism keeping two parasites alive. I was exhausted, chronically drained, and deeply isolated. But I kept functioning because that is what a chief physician does. You ignore the exhaustion and you do the job. My life was a study in extreme contrast. In the hospital, I demanded absolute accountability. If a resident made an error, there were immediate consequences. But at home, my father and sister operated with absolute impunity. They carried an unmatched sense of entitlement, believing my medical degree was a collective asset. They didn't see the missed holidays, the sleepless nights, or the sheer grit it took to build my life. They only saw the yield. The realization hit me that night in the hallway. I had spent years treating the symptoms of their dysfunction, throwing money at their crises, hoping it would eventually cure their fundamental lack of respect for me. But you cannot cure entitlement. You can only sever it. The normalization of their cruelty had finally reached its breaking point when they crossed the threshold of my home and terrified my 7-year-old daughter. The illusion shattered. The emotional fog cleared. I was no longer the useful daughter. I was the sole proprietor of my life, and I was about to execute a hostile takeover. The elevator doors chimed, and 2 Chicago police officers stepped out. I didn't greet them with hysterics. I handed them my phone, played the audio of my father's violent threats, and swiped my access card to unlock my front door. The officers witnessed the ongoing unauthorized entry and heard the threats firsthand, providing them with clear probable cause to intervene immediately. They instructed me to step back while they took full control of the scene, securing the perimeter to ensure my daughter's safety. What followed was a textbook exercise in criminal apprehension. My father and sister were caught red-handed. But what struck me wasn't their panic. It was their absolute, terrifying lack of remorse. As the officers placed them in handcuffs, the gaslighting campaign began immediately. My father didn't apologize. He didn't even look at my terrified daughter. Instead, he puffed out his chest and turned to the officers, playing the victim. He called me unhinged. He loudly declared that this was a misunderstanding, that I was an abusive, unstable woman who was locking her own family out of spite. He used the word family like a shield, expecting the police to drop their weapons and bow to his patriarchal authority. Stephanie was worse. As they marched her toward the elevator, she glared at me with pure venom. She wasn't shocked by what she had done. She was shocked that I had stopped playing along. She was outraged that the endless reservoir of my compliance had suddenly dried up. Within hours of being booked and released on bail, she took her outrage public. My phone started vibrating with notifications before my shift at the hospital even began the next morning. Stephanie had launched a coordinated smear campaign on social media. She posted long, tearful videos claiming I had suffered a mental breakdown, that the stress of the emergency room had made me paranoid, and that I had maliciously orchestrated their arrest to steal the family inheritance. An inheritance, I might add, that did not exist. Her followers ate it up. The comments flooded in, calling me a monster, a cold-hearted elitist who had turned her back on her humble roots. She was testing the limits of my patience, trying to bait me into a public emotional reaction. In the past, this tactic would have worked. I would have scrambled to explain myself, to manage the crisis, to fix the perception. Not this time. I sat in my hospital office, watching her digital tantrums, and my heart rate remained at a steady 60 beats per minute. I didn't issue a public statement. I didn't defend myself in the comments. Responding to a narcissist's smear campaign is like pouring gasoline on a fire. You don't fight a fire by feeding it oxygen. You starve it. Let her post. Let her spin her web of lies. Her public gaslighting wasn't a threat anymore. It was just more data for my files. She thought she was winning the court of public opinion, but I wasn't interested in public opinion. I was preparing for a court of law. I transitioned from being a victim of a home invasion to the chief executive of my own legal defense. The emotional ties were officially severed. It was now entirely about risk management and asset protection. I didn't need a therapist. I needed a shark. That afternoon, I hired Sarah, a powerhouse family law and civil litigation attorney whose reputation in Chicago was built on dismantling financial predators. Sitting in Sarah's glass-walled office overlooking the city, I laid out the facts. I didn't offer a sob story. I provided bank statements, tax records, the recorded audio from the smart home system, and the police report. I spoke in timelines, dollar amounts, and documented damages. Sarah looked at me, her eyes scanning the meticulous files I had prepared. She recognized immediately that she wasn't dealing with a grieving daughter. She was dealing with a client who wanted surgical removal of a financial tumor. We initiated a comprehensive forensic legal audit of the past 10 years. We subpoenaed the bank records of my father's defunct businesses. We pulled the credit history of my sister. We tracked every wire transfer, every cleared check, and every digital payment I had made to them over the last decade. The conflict had fundamentally shifted. We were no longer having a toxic family argument in a living room. We were launching a highly calculated legal offensive. The audit was an autopsy of their deception. Sarah's forensic accountants traced the flow of my money, uncovering a labyrinth of hidden accounts and offshore transfers. My father hadn't been using my money to pay his business taxes. He had been funneling it into private real estate investments in Florida under a shell corporation. Stephanie hadn't been taking out loans for her education or her endless string of emergencies. She had been funding a lavish lifestyle, completely subsidized by my grueling hours in the emergency room. They had treated my bank accounts like an endless well, assuming I was too exhausted and too guilt-ridden to ever check the water level. But an emergency room physician knows how to read the vital signs. The financial monitors were beeping, and the diagnosis was severe parasitic drain. Sarah drafted a multi-layered legal strategy. We weren't just going to sue them for the stolen funds. We were going to systematically dismantle their financial infrastructure. We filed liens against my father's hidden properties. We issued cease and desist orders for Stephanie's defamatory social media posts, attaching a massive civil suit for libel and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I was no longer playing defense. I was setting the terms of engagement. Every legal motion we filed was another brick in the wall I was building between them and my daughter. The audit proved what I had finally accepted. They were never my family. They were just bad business partners, and it was time to liquidate the partnership. The legal audit had already exposed their greed, but it was the digital hard drive, the very object Stephanie had been desperately hunting for in my bedroom, that uncovered the absolute criminal twist of this nightmare. I handed the drive over to Sarah's forensic data specialists. What they found hidden in an encrypted sector was a file labeled simply, the blue folder. When Sarah called me into her office to review the contents, the final mask dropped. It wasn't just financial exploitation anymore. It was a felony. Stephanie had not only been draining my personal accounts, she had been systematically siphoning money from Sophie's medical trust. Years ago, I had set up an irrevocable trust for my daughter, funding it aggressively to ensure her future was entirely bulletproof. The blue folder contained undeniable, time-stamped proof of forgery. Stephanie had forged my signature on multiple legal documents, designating herself as a secondary trustee, and had been embezzling tens of thousands of dollars directly from a 7-year-old's secure future. This is where the grand illusion of bloodline loyalty completely collapses. Society conditions us to believe that sharing DNA guarantees a baseline of mutual protection. We are taught that blood is thicker than water, that family will ultimately catch you when you fall. But biology is not morality. Bloodline is a biological accident, not a character reference. The belief that family members possess an inherent, magical loyalty to one another is the most dangerous myth we swallow. My sister didn't see my daughter as her niece. She didn't see her as a child who needed protecting. She saw Sophie's medical trust as a dormant, unmonitored slush fund. She weaponized our shared genetics to bypass my suspicions. She used the title of sister as a camouflage for theft. It was a devastating, lethal discovery, but it was also profoundly liberating. It eradicated any lingering ghost of guilt I might have felt about destroying them. When you realize that your own blood is willing to steal from your child, the concept of family evaporates entirely. The illusion was dead. There was no more space for reconciliation, no room for family counseling or heartfelt apologies. They had crossed the final, unforgivable boundary. The theft from Sophie's trust moved the situation out of civil litigation and directly into the realm of criminal prosecution. I sat in Sarah's office, staring at the forged documents. I felt an absolute freezing calm wash over me. The anger wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. I instructed Sarah to bypass civil negotiations entirely. We were not going to settle. We were going to hand the blue folder directly to the district attorney. My father and sister had played a reckless game, betting their freedom on the illusion that I would never send my own family to prison. They had bet against the wrong physician. After weeks of agonizing preparation, forensic audits, and countless legal filings, the final reckoning arrived in the marble lobby of my condominium building. Sarah had orchestrated the meeting perfectly. We had requested they come to sign what they believed were civil settlement papers, a final negotiation to make the lawsuits go away. They arrived looking arrogant, smelling of entitlement and fake confidence. Stephanie was smirking, already convinced she had won the standoff. As they approached the concierge desk where Sarah and I were waiting, the trap snapped shut. I stood a few paces back, observing from a distance as Sarah took the lead. She stepped forward and handed them thick, bound dossiers. The criminal complaints. My father's smirk vanished as he read the cover page detailing the federal wire fraud and the liens on his hidden Florida properties. Stephanie's face drained of color when she saw the printed copies of the forged signatures from the blue folder. Panic finally set in. My father looked at me, his eyes wide, and played his final, pathetic card. He tried to use fatherhood as a shield. He stepped forward, his voice cracking, and said, "I am your father. You cannot do this to your own blood. You are destroying our family." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. I replied, my voice steady and cold. "You destroyed the family years ago. I am just finalizing the paperwork. You aren't my father right now. You are an embezzler, and she is a thief. Law enforcement will handle the rest." I didn't wait for their reaction. I didn't stay to watch Stephanie begin to hyperventilate, or my father start begging Sarah for a deal. I turned my back on them, swiped my access card, and walked to the private elevator. The doors closed, completely shutting out their voices. I walked up to my floor in total silence. I walked into my condo, locked the door, and breathed in the quiet. I walked away knowing I had followed the law to the letter. Protecting my peace wasn't just my right, it was a necessary prescription for my own survival. If you've ever had to set a boundary with toxic family, remember, observe their actions, not their titles. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice.